people off. Um, so I feel you, ERs,
Yeah. So where did you get this person? I don't know. What's their name? I don't know.
Why is he screaming and throwing shit? What?
I don't know.
Where's he getting the poop? You didn't check. Like, is it from him? Is it in his pockets? Do we know? No, you don't want to tell me? Okay, good call. Bye. Okay.
Yeah. Make sure and stop by the EMS lounge and get yourself a snack before you go, motherfucker.
Hello.
Anyway,
useless fucks. I agree with you.
Anyway,
we're terrible.
Wow, I can't wait to see these comments roll in. Anyway, yeah. So everybody thought that this girl was. Everybody came in and just assumed that she was dead. And this is one of those situations in which they should have called the fire department, because the fire department will put an EKG on a dead person and run a 3-lead to determine whether or not they have any cardiac activity.
Yeah, it's procedure.
This person was a police officer, and the police officer was like, oh, she's clearly dead. Cancel medical, call the medical exam. I have a lot of sympathy for the person that did this, because it's like, unless you have a lot of experience checking for pulses, if somebody has a faint pulse, you're not necessarily going to feel it.
That's fair.
Also, if somebody's blood pressure is super low, they'll have a carotid pulse, but they won't have a radial pulse. They won't have a pulse at their wrist.
That's true. And a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And I mean, my ex-husband, for example, his radial pulse, and when I say radial pulse, that's the pulse at your wrist. It's usually like right at the front of your wrist, right underneath your thumb. And with my ex-husband, his radial pulse was actually like around the side and towards the back of his hand, which was super weird. Yeah, it was super strange, but that's where you could feel his radial pulse. And so in this case, it was just sort of like, this was a bad call. I understand how it happened. However, I rolled her over and checked for a radial pulse. And because I used to be a paramedic, I know how to do that. Rolled her over, felt for a pulse, and she had a thundering radial pulse. So I'm going to go ahead and say that they didn't check well. And I gave her a good sternum rub, and this girl just wakes right the fuck up. And it's like,
yeah, sternum rubs hurt. Like
they do, like a motherfucker. Yes.
Y'all, if you're questioning, if you're listening to this and questioning whether or not you've had a sternum rub, if you don't think if you're questioning, you haven't had one. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, if you aren't sure, the answer is no.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an orgasm. It's like, if you don't know, you haven't had one.
Yeah. If you have to ask, sweetie, that's not it. Like, yeah, you don't want, and unlike orgasms, you do not want a sternum rub.
No.
No.
But yeah, she woke right up, and she was a little confused because she was actually an overdose. But yeah, we woke her up. She went to the hospital. She's doing good.
That's awesome. That is great.
That moment of all of us just being like, oh shit. And the best part of it was like all the cops in the room being like, we are in so much trouble. And I'm like, this is not my problem.
You're like, bye. Sailing out the door.
Totally. Yeah, I was just like, I don't have to write this report anymore. Woo! See you later, bitches.
I picture you with like a briefcase and a trench coat, like, bye. Or like a lab coat. Like,
adios.
So what kind of training, as a medical, so you said you're not a doctor. That was going to be one of my questions, but what training do you have? Tiny home life, everybody. Tiny home life. He tries to be so quiet and like considerate for me, but you can only stay silent for so long. We've been recording for 36 minutes and he's been like perfectly silent other than his one sassy comeback.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So like and he's got to go. It's 9:14 Pacific Standard Time here for me and Grace listeners. So, and Ryan has to work in the morning at 4 a.m. So he's like, I'm going to bed, man. But so here we go. So you said you're not a doctor, which was going to be one of my questions, but like, what kind of training do you have? Like, do you have to have like a 4-year degree to become a medical examiner? Like,
it depends on where you are. Different jurisdictions will have different requirements. There are some places where, in order to be a medical legal death investigator, you have to be a police officer. You have to be part of the law enforcement community. Because in some places, the medical examiner's office is kind of folded into the sheriff's office.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And there isn't a ton of, there's some similarities, but I'd say that there are more differences. There are some places that require that require that you're a police officer, require that you have a concealed carry license. There are some places that require a 4-year degree. There are some places that require that degree is in criminal justice or some kind of adjacent discipline. Most places simply desire that you have a certain, kind of like Liam Neeson, I have a particular set of skills. My background was paramedicine, and so I did like anatomy and physiology, medical terminology, EKG interpretation, intravenous therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And then I became a paramedic, and I was a paramedic for about 5 years, decided that I hated the ambulance, and went back to school and did some undergrad work in human osteology, and was planning on going to med school. And during a break of those semesters, I got an internship at an office of the medical examiner in the city where I was going to college, or going to college again, rather. And most places just want you to have, like I said, a set of skills. And as a paramedic, I was really good at walking into a chaotic situation and kind of figuring out what was going on. I had a really good background in pathophysiology. I had a good background in kind of medical legal stuff. And more importantly, like the human osteology was helpful. The anatomy and physiology was helpful. Having a degree, my undergrad was actually in English, but no matter what anybody says, having an undergraduate degree in pretty much anything is going to be professionally helpful, because if nothing else, it just kind of demonstrates your capacity to jump through a lot of really stupid hoops and, bite the bullet and just get it done.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned that sometime in some jurisdictions you have to be a police officer. In your jurisdiction, you're not a cop. But how closely do you work with the police? Like when you're doing your investigating?
Enough so that I married one of them.
Oh, okay.
So we're close, just
a little overlap.
Oh, I met my husband on the scene of an overdose.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I had just like gone through the whole like online Bumble Tinder bullshit thing. And I'm on this scene, and this like super hot cop just walks onto the scene, and I'm like, oh, that one. I want that one.
Pretty boy.
Yeah.
Pretty boy.
Yeah. He's so pretty. Yeah. And I work with the cops a lot. We're like next to each other, like elbow to elbow all the time. And so, I wouldn't feel comfortable at a lot of these scenes without them.
That's fair.
And they are doing, yeah, I mean, they're doing their own investigation, and you know, it's their job to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. But more often than not, what they are doing is they're just helping me. You know, they're an extra set of hands. They're an extra person there to provide some semblance of safety for me. Because death scenes can get really volatile. They can get really dangerous. And so, yeah, you have to have, I mean, you have to have the ability to get along with law enforcement. You know, I mean, you definitely don't have to agree with everything that they do, but you definitely have to be able to work with them to do this job.
That's a good, I like that. That's a good take. I really, I like that take there.
Well, and I think that a lot of people, oh God, this is going to go totally sideways, but it's interesting to see firsthand the kinds of pressures that they face that a lot of people don't see. And so, you know, I mean, it's like, I'm sitting there on scene, you know, we've got a dead body. We've got their family members are freaking out. They're, you know, we don't know if they have guns. They're angry. They say they're going to kick our asses. They're going to, you know, it's like they're completely out of hand. They're saying it's our fault. They're saying we'd better do this. We'd better do that. They're throwing themselves at the truck as I am attempting to leave the scene.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, crazy shit happens. And, you know, it's like you think about it, you know, oh, well, the police, you know, assaulted these people whose family member had just died is, you know, what the, you know, what the headline would read. And in reality, it's just like, no, these people were like fucking off the chain. They were losing their shit and we were in danger, you know? And so it's just like, I think, yeah, it's interesting as a non-law enforcement person to have such an intimate view of what law enforcement does and goes through.
Okay. All right. I like that. So,
but I mean, admittedly, some of them are total and complete fuckers. And one of my favorite things to do is to terrorize police recruits. It's like they will call me intentionally. They're just like, "Are you on scene today? Will you come to this death scene and like,
will you haze this person?"
Like, yeah. Well, totally. It's like, will you bully the shit out of this guy because he's an idiot? And I'm like, yes, I will. Not exactly, but.
So
yeah, part of what I do is like when there are new police recruits, I will kind of take them through the process of investigating a death, and I may or may not give them an extra ration of shit on those scenes because it's fun.
That's.
And I mean, if you're going to have a position in which you get to terrorize the police, you might as well do it, you know?
So you talked about how when you get there, you do investigating and you look at the scene and you decide whether you talk with the pathologist about whether or not there should be an autopsy. If you guys determine that an autopsy needs to be done and like say the family doesn't want there to be one, can you force an autopsy to happen?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The person who ultimately has authority over that body is the forensic pathologist. Because, you know, I mean, somebody could murder someone, you know, a family member and be like, I don't want an autopsy. Ta-da, you know, and I get away with it. So yeah, the state forensic pathologist ultimately is the person that decides whether or not an autopsy takes place. Not all autopsies are absolutely necessary. And that's something that is not well understood because on television, everybody gets an autopsy. Every case is a wild conspiracy or assassination, and everything gets autopsied. And that is just not true.